Sergeant, please start your recordings.
PC recording on the way.
Cloud recording rolling.
Backup is rolling.
Sergeant Martinez, you may begin with your opening statement.
Good morning and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Economic Development, jointly with the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video? To minimize disruption, please silence your electronic devices. And if you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. We are ready to begin.
All right, we're ready to roll, Sergeant?
Yes, sir.
All right, good morning, everyone. And a big thank you to our security team, Carl and the Sergeant. You know, you guys had to take on many roles, and now you're technology experts on top of everything else. So we thank you for keeping us safe when we were in City Hall and also keeping these virtual hearings moving. Not an easy task, especially with this crew that's on board. Look at Jimmy and I ready to go, so you guys are in big trouble. So good morning. Welcome everyone to this joint hearing between the New York City Council Committees on Economic Development and Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. Today is Monday, November 15th, 2021. My name is Paul Vallone, and I've had the privilege of chairing the Committee on Economic Development. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my dear friend and co-chair, Jimmy Van Bramer, who's here this morning with his entire council crew who's joining with him, as well as the members of both committees, the administration, and the city's official tourism and marketing organization, New York City and Company, for coming together to hold this hearing, which we've been doing for over the last 4 years now. We have been joined by a whole bunch of great council members this morning. We have Councilmember Barron, Cornegie, Dharma Diaz, a Majority Leader Lori Cumbo, Jim Gennaro, I see on, Peter Koo, Councilmember Dronai, Lewis, Moya, and Powers. Okay, so this hearing marks the culmination of several tourism-related hearings that these two committees have held throughout the course of this council session. I believe I can speak for both committees when I say we take tremendous pride in directing the council's attention towards the tourism sector over the last 4 years, a sector of the economy that drives so much economic activity in our city, but often was overlooked as it straddled several different areas of the city's workforce. I can say that between Councilmember Van Bramer and I, it is no longer overlooked. In fact, we made it a priority for budget and for legislation. Over the last 4 years, our two communities have been here to address the issues facing the tourism industry head on, beginning with the offsite hearing, which we really enjoyed at the TWA Hotel showroom on the 86th floor of One World Trade. Several bills aimed at improving the city's tourist experience and the tourism economy and continuing through the darkest days of the pandemic and the gradual recovery that we have been going through at this point. The goal of today's hearing is to hear from our colleagues at New York City and Company and the Department of Cultural Affairs about how their efforts have improved the tourist economy in the city over the last year and a half, but specifically how those efforts have borne fruit during the course of the last quarter, as indoor dining has become more normalized, museums, shows, and cultural institutions have reopened with international tourism that just began this month. The last time our two committees met on this topic was in September 2020, when vaccines were not yet available and the prospects for return to a normal seemed bleak back in those days. In the years since, over 87% of city adults have received at least one dose of the vaccine, and admittance to indoor dining of cultural attractions is as simple as showing a vaccine card. And let me say for the crew that's on here, thank you, because in those darkest days, it was this crew that really did lead the way when everyone was looking for what to do first, not next, but first. And EDC, New York and Company, and these great team that are here worked tirelessly to make sure the city did see the light that is happening now. Just last week, the city's airport celebrated the return of vaccinated international tourists, and major attractions like Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall have offered to admit travelers with any vaccine approved by the WHO, not just those authorized for use by the CDC. It seems like things are starting to improve and return to some state of normal. and we on the committees are looking for a bit of a deeper dive into that new data. Some of the questions for today's hearing: well, how has the reopening driven up tourist numbers? How close are hotel occupancy levels to returning back to normal? What sort of attendance are we seeing in the city's many shows, museums, and cultural attractions? Also, what lessons can we learn from other countries as they have been reopening across the globe? The United States may have lagged in permitting international tourists to come back, but that doesn't mean we can't hit the ground running and getting tourists here now that we're once again open for business. We on the committees would like to reiterate our support for New York City and Company and the Herculean efforts it has undertaken throughout this crisis in keeping New York's tourist economy above water. Our hope as we begin to emerge from the pandemic is that NYC and Company and its many partners can continue to draw tourists back to New York and ensure that its many world-class attractions recover as quickly and safely as possible. With that said, I'd like to acknowledge the academic development team here at the council. Committee Council Alex Polinoff with his shiny new beard, policy analyst William Hognock, and finance analyst Aliyah Ali, who she has been stood by our side for all these years, and commend them on all their hard work preparing for this hearing throughout the entire session. In addition, I have my Chief of Staff, Jonathan Shutt, my Deputy Chief of Staff, Ahmed Nazar, and my Legislative Director, Kevin Krapowski, who has been tirelessly keeping me sounding and looking good over these last 4 years. I will now turn the floor over to my co-chair, Councilmember Jimmy Van Bramer, and a friend of the Vallone family for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Vallone, and indeed it is always a pleasure to work alongside yourself. As you alluded to, I am a son of Astoria, Queens, and grew up knowing Speaker Peter Vallone as my local council member, and my mother is among the many people who absolutely adore Speaker Vallone, but I am grateful for your service and the work that we've done together and your friendship. You've acknowledged all the members of the Cultural Affairs Committee, and I thank them and, of course, all the council members who have joined us here today. As Chair Vallone mentioned, we have had a laser-like focus on tourism, and you cannot talk about tourism in the city of New York without, of course, talking about culture and the arts, because they are so interwoven and so linked. And we all remember those dark days in March of 2020 when everything began, that painful process of shutting down all in-person programming, performances. And while culture never closed, and the Culture at 3 call quickly sprung up, and the arts community banded together, we saw something that we thought we would never see, which is the stage at Carnegie Hall go dark, and the halls of the Met and so many of our local outer borough cultural arts organizations not see people admiring the art, the performances, the shows that, of course, impacted artists and those folks, many of whom lost their sources of income because the arts is such an incredible driver of employment and economic activity. But we're also seeing, which is so exciting, a rebirth. And I was there along with my husband, Dan, at Carnegie Hall's opening night just a few weeks ago. And it was magical in all the ways that culture and the arts makes New York City a magical place. We wore tuxedos that night and we took the train in. And as we were getting off at the stop at Carnegie, there were two women looking at us from across the train. And as we got up, they said, "You guys look really, really great tonight. Like, where are you going?" And we said, "We're going to Carnegie Hall." And I told folks that night at the reception, it's one of those moments that happens in New York City, right? And it doesn't happen unless we're open. It doesn't happen unless the arts are thriving and folks are going to Carnegie Hall. I also wanted to share a personal story because my husband's niece and best friend are visiting this weekend. So we've had two 21-year-olds, Paul, in the house for 4 days. And
I know that feeling well.
I know you do. And it's been great. So they were able to go to the Met on Saturday. They're at Ellis Island today. But in addition to that, of course, they went shopping in Brooklyn, and we've taken them out to eat all over Queens. And that's what happens when people come to New York, right? They enjoy the city. They take in all of the cultural offerings. They also shop. They drive the economy. Jobs, of course, come back. So it's been a difficult stretch for everyone on this call and in this hearing, but so much is possible now, and that's why it's so important for us to continue the work that Chair Vallone and I have done in focusing on tourism and the success story that it was before the pandemic, and the success story that I believe it will be again. And so it's very exciting to think about the fact that we'll get back to 65 million tourists a year in the city of New York, and what that means in terms of jobs and economic development. But for now, I just want to thank everyone before they get into their testimony and we get into our questions for everything they've done in keeping this city alive. I want to also thank, in particular, my legislative director, Jack Bernatovitz, my chief of staff, Matt Wallace, and our committee's principal financial analyst, Alia Ali, who already got a great shout out from Chair Vallone, but our policy analyst, Christy Dwyer, is on the call, and she's equally wonderful, as is our committee counsel, Brenda McKinney, who is, of course, taking care of two amazing little babies that have just joined us in the world. So we send love to Brenda and the family. And with that, I will turn it back over to Chair Vallone.
Well, I think Alex back to council so we can continue on with the format, and then we can swear in our first panelists. And thank you, Chair Jimmy Van Bramer. Looking forward to today's hearing. Yeah, and I think that Jimmy mentioned it right. This topic has been the #1 hearing between both committees during our term together, which shows you how important these topics and these issues have been individually to us as a council and for the city. No other hearing topic has been heard as much as this, as we went before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now as we come out of the pandemic. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair has mentioned, I am Alex Polinoff, counsel to the Economic Development Committee of the New York City Council, and I'll be the moderator for today's hearing. Before we begin testimony, I just want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called upon to testify, at which point you will be unmuted by the host. Members of the administration and New York City and Company who are testifying will not be muted during the question and answer portion of administration's testimony. I will be calling on panelists to testify in order, so please listen for your name to be called. The first panelist to give testimony today will be Donna Karen, Executive Vice President of Research and Insight at New York City and Company. And New York City and Company's Chief Marketing Officer, Nancy Mamana, will also be available for questioning as well. Deputy Commissioner Sheila Feinberg from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Assistant Vice President of Portfolio Management, Bianca Sosa at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, will also be available for questioning. I will call upon each of you shortly for the oath, and then again when it is time to begin your testimony. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question of the administration or of a specific panelist, please use the Zoom raise hand function, and we will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions for 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes to answer those questions. Please note that for the ease of this virtual hearing, we will not be permitting a second round of questions for each panelist outside of the committee chairs. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov if you have not already done so. The deadline for written testimony is 72 hours after the hearing. Before we begin the testimony period, I will administer the oath. To all members of the administration who will be offering testimony or will be available for questions, please raise your right hands now. I will read you the oath and then call on each of you individually for a response. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Executive Vice President Karen.
I do.
Chief Marketing Officer Mamana.
Yes, I do.
Deputy Commissioner Feinberg.
Yes, I do.
Assistant Vice President Sosa.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Executive Vice President Karen, you may begin your testimony when ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Vallone, Chairman Van Bramer, and members of the committees on economic development and cultural affairs, libraries, and international intergroup relations, as well as members of the City Council. I am Dr. Donna Karen, Executive Vice President of Research and Insights, and I'm joined today by Nancy Mamana, our Chief Marketing Officer at NYC & Company, testifying on behalf of our CEO, Fred Dixon. We thank you for this opportunity to share the current status of the city's tourism and hospitality industry and NYC & Company's efforts, along with our government and private sector partners, to resuscitate the industry as we work towards economic recovery. I would like to provide a quick background on who we are and what we do as an organization. NYC & Company is the official destination marketing and tourism organization, as well as the Convention and Visitors Bureau for the 5 boroughs of New York City. Our mission is to maximize inbound travel and tourism opportunities throughout the city, build economic prosperity, and spread the dynamic image of the 5 boroughs around the world. We are a 501c6 private, not-for-profit member organization and represent the interests of nearly 2,000 member businesses and organizations from the 5 boroughs. We are governed by an 85-member board of directors representing a diverse range of businesses from across the city. Our members range from hotels, cultural organizations, restaurants and attractions, to bids and chambers of commerce. Together, they fund about half our operations. We also hold a procurement contract with the Department of Small Business Services to provide the City of New York with certain tourism marketing services. Travel and tourism has long been a driver of economic prosperity for New York City, with direct and indirect impacts in all 5 boroughs. 2019 marked the 10th consecutive year of growth in the number of visitors, and importantly, in visitor spending, business revenues, job creation, new investments, and city tax revenue. However, the pandemic crippled the tourism and hospitality industry once normal operations came to a halt. Our global community fractured as borders were closed and convenings of any size became impossible. Let me give you a snapshot of the economic costs and losses the city endured during the first year of the pandemic. Combined domestic and international visitation dropped by 65%, and visitor spending decreased by 66%. This translated to a greater than 50% loss in jobs and a $2 billion decrease in local tax revenues from all sources. Tourism supported hotel room demand, always a leading indicator for economic impact, fell by 69% in calendar 2020, with hotel taxes down by at least $500 million to the general fund. These enormous losses were aggravated by the closing of the US borders, as international markets account for 50% of room nights and almost half of all visitor spending across the city. Given this reduction in visitation and spending since March 2020, especially by overnight travel and international visitors, the city's leisure and hospitality sector has lost more jobs than the finance, information, real estate, and professional and business services sectors combined. Leisure and hospitality jobs were down by 50%, which represents over 230,000 jobs lost last year. As you may know, a significant proportion of the tourism workforce also lives in neighborhoods throughout the city. Many of them work in small businesses that provide key inputs to the visitor experience, from wholesalers to event specialists to local tour guides and startups. The tourism ecosystem spreads benefits at every level. Restaurants and bars, which rely on visitors for about 1/3 of their revenues, have been most affected in terms of actual number of jobs lost, a loss of at least 105,000 jobs as of September this year, still down by more than 1/3 from their 2019 peaks. It was good news when seated dining became available and then indoor dining returned. The industry has been adding jobs, but remains at risk as the winter weather returns. On the other hand, though smaller in numbers, the arts, entertainment, cultural, and recreation sector has been hardest hit. Given the attraction of the city's cultural community to visitors, 6 in 10 jobs in the sector are supported by visitor spending. As a result, in September, even as Broadway, live events, and museums are open across the boroughs, jobs in this sector remain at historic lows. 25,000 jobs below 2019 levels. That's 28% below benchmark. This sector remains critical to the city's image and recovery. Active hotel inventory also remains down compared to pre-pandemic levels, even as new hotels have opened and properties across the 5 boroughs have reopened to visitors. The employment situation in this sector remains 32% below 2019 levels, hitting just 219,000 jobs in September this year, still more than 100,000 jobs below earlier levels. The return of domestic visitors has driven occupancy rates to an annual average of just 55%. The sector remains at risk as the recovery of business and international travel will take several years to regain peak levels. Throughout these uncertain times, NYC & Company remains pivotal to the city and the industry by connecting, convening, and supporting critical sectors of the economy from the earliest days of the pandemic. In June 2020, we brought together key stakeholders from across sectors and the boroughs, including public health partners, to establish the Coalition for New York City Hospitality and Tourism Recovery. The first objective of the coalition was to create a tourism recovery plan, and in July 2020, we released All in NYC, the roadmap for tourism's reimagining and recovery. Utilizing our strength as the city's destination marketing organization, major components of this plan included our continuing local and resident revitalization campaign, All in NYC, our health initiative, the Stay Well NYC Pledge, tactics for a renewed commitment to diversity and inclusivity, especially in lifting up New York City's BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. We put hyper-local exploration and experiences along with staycation messaging at the forefront of our initiatives until domestic business and ultimately international travel could resume. As the U.S. opens our borders to international markets, New York City is regaining its rightful place as the top international destination, bringing global visitors who stay longer and do more dining, shopping, visiting museums and historic sites, and attending live performances or sporting events in the city. Through strategic government investment in our work, we have been able to maintain our presence and messaging in key global markets, ready to pivot to welcoming domestic and international visitors once again. This much needed government funding has expanded our marketing reach and research capabilities. Therefore, we are grateful to Senate Majority Leader Schumer for ensuring New York City received significant funds from the American Rescue Plan, We would like to thank the mayor for making a historic investment in our work, and Chairman Vallone for speaking at the mayor's presser announcing the city's first investment in tourism recovery. Now, Nancy Mamana will share our 2021 marketing campaigns and vibrancy programs that continue to revitalize the travel and tourism industry. Nancy?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share our work with you today. On June 24th, we launched our global It's Time for New York City campaign, which is the largest multi-phase global tourism marketing and advertising campaign ever created for New York City. It's Time for New York City was rolled out as restrictions began to lift, more people were getting vaccinated, and travel resumed in the US and beyond. The campaign reminds visitors of the city's unrivaled energy, excitement, and the abundance of endless experiences and resiliency that make New York City the most iconic destination in the world. Designed to create urgency and FOMO, the fear of missing out, It's Time for New York City campaign has 3 phases. It includes television, digital, outdoor media, and partnerships of several types. To date, 3 commercials have launched asking first, where were you in the summer of 2021? Followed by Lights Up, which celebrates the fall return of Broadway, performing arts and culture, and our third highlighting the holiday season, which just launched the first week of November. The mayor continues to show his support by including us in his pressers to showcase our commercials and celebrate the return of tourism and vitality to the city. In addition to our media, we have joined forces with important travel partners to drive actionable results. We began in June with a partnership with AAA, targeting the Northeast Drive market, followed by American Airlines in July, targeting the longer haul US domestic market, and Amtrak targeting the Acela corridor from October through Q1 of next year. We also followed up our 2020 New York City Misses You Too out of home campaign internationally with a New York City is ready for you creative messaging, which replaced it in the UK, Mexico, Japan, and Sweden, in part to help fulfill our contractual requirement with the city to utilize our JC2Co media allocation, but also to help keep New York City top of mind as travelers began considering their next destination. When the federal government announced the November 8th reopening to vaccinated travelers, we immediately began expanding our efforts by developing international media campaigns and partnerships with airlines and tour operators in key markets. Those partnerships include British Airways, which launched in London on November 8th, and then Porter Airlines in Canada, Aeromexico in Mexico, CVC in Brazil, and 6 other partnerships that will be live by Q4 2021. Other markets will follow in Q1 of next year. Throughout the pandemic, we have continued our engagement with locals and tri-state visitors and commuters through our annual vibrancy campaigns designed to help promote the energy and attractiveness of our local tourism and hospitality businesses during need periods. Since its inception in summer 1992, NYC Restaurant Week, held in both January and February, as well as July and August, has been a celebration of dining, bringing people together for a shared experience of food, drinks, and camaraderie. Taking into consideration the vulnerability of the restaurant industry, we made it economically feasible for any restaurant to participate, receiving the largest number of 5-borough participants ever. On the heels of Restaurant Week's continued success, NYC & Company has launched seasonal vibrancy programs, including the twice annual Broadway Week and New York City Off-Broadway Week, with 2-for-1 tickets to some of the hottest shows in town, as well as those shows at Broadway and smaller theaters across the boroughs, as well as NYC Must See Week, which offers 2-for-1 tickets to nearly 70 attractions, museums, tours, and performing arts. These programs have attracted visitors from the tri-state region and beyond, and are economic drivers during what is typically a slower period. We are continuing that with It's Time for Culture, which just wrapped in October, which was really designed to highlight all of the variety of cultural attractions available throughout the 5 boroughs, large and small. And we are also following up with a push around our local businesses and holiday shopping and retail this November and December. In January, we will also be bringing back New York City Winter Outing, which is a combination of NYC Restaurant Week, Broadway Week, Must See Week, and the newly added NYC Hotel Week, which we will begin promoting in December for planning purposes. By combining all programs into our broader platform and under one messaging umbrella, we expand the reach of the message to drive day trips as well as valuable overnight visitors and traffic to these businesses across the city. As we rejoice with the successful return of Broadway, performing arts, nightlife, music, and sports venues, the industry is still challenged as not all international borders have reopened, business meetings and conferences have not fully returned, and the coronavirus variants remain a threat to our new normal. NYC & Company will continue to support our industry by stimulating demand from hyperlocal, regional, national, and now international visitors. This will require continued smart policymaking and investment from our government partners, as well as sharing in real-time public health guidelines with all of our audiences. We knew this would be a marathon and not a sprint, and are steeled for the long road ahead to a full economic recovery. However, without a stable long-term funding strategy, we fall behind on our competitors, affecting our mission to build economic prosperity and share all that each borough has to offer around the world. Thank you for allowing this time to testify. As always, we appreciate the council's support of the industry and being partners with us in this work. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen and Ms. Mamana. I will now turn it over to questions from the chairs. Panelists from the administration, please stay unmuted if possible during this question and answer period. And a reminder to both chairs that you will be in control of muting and unmuting yourself during this period. Thank you. Chair Vallone, you may begin.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Dr. Karen and Nancy. Boy, that was a lot of information. Thank you very much. And that's how you get prepared for a hearing. You know, in some respects, it's not fair, right? Because Broadway just reopened this Labor Day and November. We just had international tourists come back. So it's difficult for us to say, okay, tell us where we are and let's hopefully it's all back to 100%. Clearly it's not. But we thank you so much, because when the entire country and the world shut down, so much of it turned to you and your team, who also was devastated with budget cuts and employee cuts. And yet through that, you managed with the All in New York and now with the new campaign, with the 3 phases that Nancy just talked about. I think those are some of the bright lights that will bring us back. I really wanted to give this time for you to elaborate on some of that data that you just gave us. And because it is Councilmember Van Bramer and I, as we come to the end of our terms, as much as we don't want to go, we're kind of have to go, there will be new chairs. And what I hope to do is lay that format for the future chairs to take this type of hearing and the amount of work we've done together to keep the momentum going and keep the development of the new partnership, because I really think it is a new partnership between government and the work that you've been doing. In the beginning, we had to kind of wrap our hands around all the things New York & Company and EDC were doing within the tourism and the hospitality and cultural. But now it's the synchronicity between City Hall and those agencies. And I'd hate for that to go backwards. So I think it's so important for today's hearing and the hearings and the work we've done before, and as Chair Van Bramer will say also with his questions, that we take the steps and continue forward. So I guess for the New York Company team, how would you envision that governmental relation that we've kind of nurtured together through City Hall? What is it that you need to continue the rebound from your city partner to make sure that the rebound continues?
I think at the most basic level, it would be really just supporting these businesses in any way you can as a New Yorker. That is at the core, and that is something we live and breathe every day as well, to patronize these businesses, and also anything you could do to help support our messaging and amplify what we're doing. Every day in our channels, you'll see us promoting local businesses and across our network in every borough, and really anything you could do to tag us and support and amplify our messaging is truly grateful. We agree that we've made amazing progress and have seen incredible collaboration and partnership with our partners at DCLA and EDC and with the council. And we also look forward to continuing that momentum. It's critical as we move forward. And it's been amazing to see, especially over the last year of how we've really come together. We have seen that we are stronger as a combined voice. So we also look forward to that continuing.
You know, Nancy, I guess one of the things that we could continue immediately is the work with our fellow New Yorkers and within the tri-state, the domestic visitation. Do you think we reached, you know, I guess, where are we, since international just started, it's really not fair. I mean, we can kind of take some shots at what we think will be, but where do we think we are with the numbers with domestic visitation into the city? Have we reached the pre-pandemic numbers, and like where are we today, and how can we reach that maximum? Because we're going to still be so dependent on our fellow New Yorkers and within the tri-state to come back to New York.
Let me take a small stab at that. We have come back quite remarkably, particularly in the second half of this year, as the rate of vaccination has spread in our city, in our region, and across the country. We are having, as many of our members in arts and culture, in dining, and other parts of the city will tell you, very strong weekend performance. That is a drive market and local coming into the city for what we have on offer. We will take at least another year or two to fully complement that domestic market, the long haul traveler who needs to fly here, the business traveler who is dealing not only with the pandemic, but also with the concerns of their corporations and management about spending. And this is a pattern that will take us a couple of years, but we have certainly opened the faucet and are seeing the positive results of the collective efforts of our government partners in supporting the pandemic safety, and our business partners in travel and tourism, as they have adopted these same policies and practices.
So you think, Doctor, that maybe within a year or two, we'll hopefully get back to where our domestic numbers were pre-pandemic?
My current forecast is domestic will be breaking through old records before the end of 2023. Things can always turn out faster.
If the families of myself and Councilman Van Bramer are any example, we shall be hitting those numbers sooner rather than later, since we love to visit and come.
We will encourage you to encourage your families.
Thank you for that.
The holidays are right around the corner, and we're already getting what are we doing in the next 2 to 4 weeks? So we have that all ready to go. I would say you just brought up some of the business partners, and so much of that is dependent on the hotel industry, and there's so many sectors within that you have to keep your handle on. Do you see, I'm still seeing some very high vacancy rates, I guess, within the hotel industry. Some of the complaints or some of the concerns during the pandemic were the state, and not so much city, but state and city limitations and regulations that made it so difficult to rent out event space and bring in folks. And we know there's vacancy, and there were different type of vaccination requirements and different type of meeting requirements and limitations. Do you see that there are still some limitations on a state level and or the city that we could help in not so much removing or easing, or are we back to pre-pandemic of the limitations that were set by government?
Donnie, you want to take that one?
I think that I have to say that I would need to get back to you on some of the very specific changes, things that are still in development, but we are seeing that events are taking place at the Javits Center, meetings and events are taking place in large venues across the city. The mandates for vaccination and mask wearing in our arts and cultural institutions has gone from what we have observed outside of that particular institution, seems to be going very well. And it does appear that our travelers, for the most part, have adjusted to that they will show proof of vaccine, that they will, in fact, stay masked in a theater or a museum and limit the time they have their masks down in an indoor dining establishment.
So it's a work in progress, but if we could figure if there, because I know that one limitation, a limit of 50 people into a meeting hall was disastrous for some of our hotels and some of our local venues, even Jacob Javits, that couldn't bring that. And the easing of that type of restriction is monumental in trying to bring those groups back. Do you Do you see, I guess, even with Jacob Javits, I know I think there's less than 20 different events planned for the year. Is most of those domestic bookings, and we're not able to tap into the international bookings yet? And, when do we see, hopefully, that we can start seeing some of our fellow travelers from across the world in Europe come back to us?
I think with the government opening to vaccinated international travelers with a negative test, we will begin to see both the buyers and sellers, the attendees and the exhibitors at these large events begin to pick up. Then we know that our development team in the Javits and our member hotels are working very hard on attracting the kind of business that will help support New York City travel and tourism.
Well, I think those are, and I guess, Nancy, if there's anything in there you can add into, I think with the unemployment rates and the vacancy rates where they are, right, this is a critical time to turn that around. Do you see anything? I guess the partnership, for one, is key, and we've had that, but the bringing back of the jobs that have been at such a low rate, I think Doctor mentioned that it was still over 200,000 for those who within this industry that are unemployed. What is a key factor of bringing back those who were previously employed in this sector, but now is still having those lower rates? I know with tourism increases, that will be alleviated, but I don't know how much longer some of those folks can wait. So with some of the stimulus funding and some of the federal and state programs that are coming in, is there anything short term that we can see to maybe help those who are still unemployed in the sector?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, what we've been waiting for to complete the puzzle has just occurred with the international border reopening. That is really the missing piece. We just can't get to full recovery without that. With international travelers historically being 20% of the visitation and room nights, but 50% of the spend, it has had an enormous impact, as we all know. So now that that's occurred, we really have dove in with a pretty robust plan of partnerships across travel partners in our key markets and beyond to help generate that traffic back. So we've got 10 partnerships in the making with all of our key feeder markets with either airlines or tour operators. Clearly it's the leisure segment first, but there is a lot of pent up demand, and we're very bullish about what we're hearing from British Airways with the first partnership to roll out. You may have seen our event that we had last Monday. A lot of interest. I think their routes, from what we're understanding from them, are sold out for the holiday season. So we do think we're on our way back. We've taken that last step of the concentric circle approach. We finally see the last circle. So that's we're in the beginning, I think, of what we might begin to see some real change and impact with that. It may take several months for us to completely bear out, but we do think we will begin to see a difference this holiday season and into Q2 of next year. So really, that's what we've been waiting for.
Yeah, I think that's why we said at the beginning, it's kind of unfair, since a lot of this has just started in the last quarter, to hope for it perfectly back to 100%. We know that's not the case, but I guess we're trying to create that groundwork through either legislation and or budget and that partnership to make sure that turnaround is as quickly as possible. I don't want, especially even budget, right? I mean, the budget for New York and Company was devastated as this progression through the pandemic and back, and you guys have had to do this on a small staff. Have you been able to revamp and recover a little bit through your own budget and through some of the stimulus funding and funding that's come through? And I guess, where are you today based on how difficult it got about a year ago?
The stimulus funding that we received was a game changer for us. It absolutely has helped bolster our efforts and do things that we have not been able to do in the past. We always had partnerships with international airlines and tour operators, but not to this scale and depth. We've not done television advertising, at least not in several years. So all of this work is largely because of the funds that we were lucky enough to receive. So we are, it was a game changer for us, and it did allow us to hire back some of our staff, not all, but enough to have the resources to do the work. And we expect that to continue taking us through to Q2 with those campaigns. So we just look forward to future ways of continuing the momentum as we know that the recovery will be ongoing after that. But it absolutely has allowed us to go very deep and wide with our efforts because of that funding. And it definitely it made us a lot more, I think, impactful in terms of the reach that we were able to achieve because of that campaign, and really delving into media outlets and countries at a level that we had not been able to previously do. So we're very fortunate, and really just looking ahead at how we can maintain the momentum after that.
Do you think that the funding will carry over to next year for continued use within the budget, or are we going to reach a point where that won't be the case?
Yeah, it's meant to carry our international efforts. So we have reserved some to continue into next year, just based on the timing of the border reopening. So it should sunset in June. After that, we'll need to look at other ways to try to maintain that level, and then some on a more consistent basis. But we were intending for much of that, and we had reserved some of those funds to make sure that we were getting it to market internationally when the time was right. So now we're in the process of deploying that. But yeah, I think through June we'll be spending those funds.
Well, now you know why we were working so hard to try to get some additional revenue streams for New York and Company. I know EDC is with us today, and I'm going to ask them at the very end, just a couple minutes, on how they envision their budget through assisting, because so much of the work you do is dependent on that budget. And I was always trying to work with your team to try to find other avenues, so that if a day like this did come, thank God for the stimulus, but I wanted to be able to give you that continued, because we can't have you so at a depleted force. We need so much of the work. And I think I'll just, since you mentioned the new campaign, I remember standing in Bay Plaza talking about the All in New York and telling everyone to come to Bell Boulevard and back to New York City, and as Jimmy did in his district, and we were all saying, come on back. And that played a big part, letting people know it's okay just to come back outside, and then to come back to businesses. And now you mentioned that the It's Time for New York City campaign. Is the All In campaign transitioned into the new campaign, or is there any segments that are left over? And did you have any final numbers from the All In? Is there anything that you wanted to expand on that?
We did transition from All In into It's Time, but we are still seeing some social content using the All In NYC hashtag that was really designed for locals. As you know, at that time, we were very much talking to our residents to steal them and to celebrate their resiliency. Then as we opened up to speak to visitors, we just kind of evolved into It's Time, which is really more outwardly facing, and it was really designed to give folks the permission to visit. We did quite a bit of market research, qualitative and quantitative, and at that time, the biggest hurdle was that people were not sure if everything was open and if they should come and if it was time to come, and what would be open when they arrived. There was a lot of confusion, and there was some hesitancy. So we went very hard with that message with It's Time, to very much come forward with the fact that it is time to visit and give them the permission to come now, while we could still capitalize on the summer season. So if you see all the content, it's almost in real time that we've shot all around the boroughs with what is happening now to demonstrate the vibrancy. We wanted to show people, not tell people. And it was very much about making sure people were aware of what was happening, that they understood our protocols, but that they should come now. And we knew that we needed to maintain a very aggressive message to stay top of mind for travelers who at that time were perhaps looking to go to beaches and mountains and things like that. We wanted to make sure they knew that what you really want to do, you've probably had enough of being alone. You really want to come here where the vibrancy is, and where the people are, and all the energy is that you've been craving. So the content in the campaign is a very different one from All In. So we did open it up, and we do imagine continuing to use this likely through the end of next year. And then obviously we'll look forward into an evolved message after that. But it's broad and simple enough, as All In was meant to be, to encapsulate a lot of different messages and extend into a lot of different campaigns. So again, It's Time for Culture just launched in October, and we'll be continuing to house everything we do under It's Time for at least and through next year. And then we'll look to shift messaging, hopefully again, to a different message when It's Time is no longer needed, and we look forward to that.
Well, and I know Chair Van Bremen is going to have so many questions on the micro level. And the macro level, there's so many things we talked about, but so many of his bills were instrumental in getting the open streets and for cultural programs to benefit. Also, we saw the opportunity for that. we benefited that. And some of that is a direct partnership between city government and EDC and New York and company. So those are direct things that we can work on together to make sure that the good parts of those programs continue and how we can make them better. I saw that Tom Ferrugia is here from the Broadway League, and I see Times Square Alliance, and they both put some great testimony in. And I just wanted, I guess, for the fact that we have the first panel, when you look at their testimony, I know Tom's going to mention it, it's surprisingly similar in the positives and what they see as some of the local constraints, I guess, in bringing us back to 100%. And the thing that I noticed on both was the first that was mentioned for Ms. Wright and for Tom was that the city is safe and welcoming. And I know it is such a difficult task for NYC and company, but it does bring forth the partnership with BIDS and the local police departments and the city to provide that type of environment. Just want to give you a minute to what your thoughts might be on how we can help to continue to provide that level of comfort and safety that's needed within the tourism industry. I know that both Keith Powers and I were very excited in enacting 1811, which gave Times Square Alliance and the local industry to kind of zone correctly and have some control over the local streets. How do you envision, I guess, to keep that momentum going? Do you see some of those partnerships to provide that safety and comfort level that is needed for the tourism industry?
Apologies. Is that meant for us?
Yeah, I think it's for you because you're working with these great partners like the Broadway League and Times Square Alliance and all of the folks that comprise the parts of the local part of the piece of the puzzle for tourism and cultural affairs. Their testimony is bringing up their concern about making sure the city is safe and welcoming. That is the first thing that both of their testimonies talk about, as well as funding and the partnership for that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on providing that, because obviously as the Sandy City transitions back into full capacity, providing and taking back streets and taking back hotel rooms and taking back that safety component, I guess, what do you envision for 2022 to continue to provide that safety level that's so part of the tourism industry?
Yeah, obviously it is critical for us, and we do get quite a bit of feedback from our travel partners as well as consumers. So continuing the efforts to maintain safety is core to our message, and we absolutely have become a repository for the most up-to-date information for travelers on our website. There are the most traffic pages on our site have been our coronavirus resources and information updates. So our travelers are interested. At times they are confused. So we take special care to explain exactly what is happening here. And we want to make sure they are getting a very accurate picture. We've done man on the street interviews with people waiting online for Broadway shows so that they can speak directly to potential travelers on how great an experience they're having and how wonderful it's been, walking the streets of Times Square and wherever it is they are, US Open, the Bronx Zoo. We've put them out all over the boroughs. So we want people to know what is really happening here. And also, I think the efforts we've made from a coronavirus perspective and how we've maintained our levels and how we've really led the way in that part of the recovery, travelers are appreciative of that. And they, I think from even a meeting planner perspective, I mean, these are things that we're touting as a city because the folks that are out there traveling now, they want to know and they care. So those types of things, just like sustainability, those are the things that travelers really look to. So we heavily promote the strides that we are making. The safety piece is something, obviously, that it is something we are watching, and we try to make sure that we are communicating as openly as we can with travelers to let them know what's happening. But yes, it's absolutely something that is top of mind for us and for travelers.
And I thank you for that, because the coordination and cooperation, it can't be voices from different aspects. It has to be a joint voice. So as council members and as legislators, when we hear that voice and we take action. So I think the better that we can focus on those topics together, so it's not piecemealed out. And public safety is sometimes not thought about in this sector, and it has to be. So I think it's important to have your voice and those here. And I think, Jimmy, the last thing I'm just going to for EDC, is Bianca still here from EDC? There you are. I guess your role in this, New York and Company's laid out a vision to bring us back, and it's from domestic to international. And so much of that falls within the umbrella of the great economic development corporation. So I guess where do you see and how are you partnering with New York and Company and the different components of the tourism and hospitality sectors for the end of this quarter and beyond?
Sure. I think similarly to what Donna and Nancy said, that we did partner closely with the All in NYC campaign last year. And I think going forward, EDC's tourism, I think sector, we're kind of limited, but we did restart cruises at the terminals, and we also are running public markets in the different boroughs. So we're looking forward to continuing those efforts.
Well, is there an aspect, EDC's broad planning and projects, capital, local, and the development of different industries, obviously that will affect the different components within the hospitality sectors. Do you see any capital projects or different funding plan that could benefit the tourism industry going forward? Because so much of the New York and Company and their partners were survived on the different funding that came through on a federal level and stimulus funding. But I like to make sure that that stream is continued beyond stimulus funding, because so much of the budget is dependent on tourism in New York City, and sometimes we forget that. So I think EDC's role will be instrumental, and once that funding package ends, that we can make sure that New York and Company has the ability to go forward. I guess your vision for that, and do you see any change in budgetary approach or different ways that EDC can affect or assist that industry?
Yeah, I think we're still doing kind of a comprehensive lesson learned from COVID and how it's affected EDC's budget. And we're gonna, I think, try and incorporate what we've learned from COVID and how tourism and, where our budget maybe is at risk going forward.
Yeah, I think, Bianca, that would be a key partnership. I think what we just heard through the first panel is making sure that city agencies, city government, EDC, and the folks that make the hospitality tourism industry so vibrant, EDC has to be part and parcel of that going forward, through budget, through assistance, through how the capital is planned, how the local programming is planned, how the 5 boroughs are envisioned, how we go beyond Manhattan, as Jimmy and I have always fought to bring Queens into the picture beyond, and that has happened. These last 8 to 12 years, that has definitely happened. The breadth of it has reached the outer boroughs finally. That's what I see EDC's future within that. I think that's the great work that you do has to be partnered with these conversations that Dr. and Nancy have put together for us, and that would be my hope. Okay, so Chair Van Bramer, I'm sorry about that, but there was so many different components of this hearing, and I just would feel negligent if we didn't touch all of them. So I appreciate your patience on that. I happily turn over to you. And then for the panels that are right after, once Chair Van Bramer is finished, we're going to go right to the panels. And I know some of the testimony has been submitted, and anyone out there, the council members want to jump in and raise a hand, Councilmember Van Bramer and I will let you speak at that point. So Chair Van Bramer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Valone. I love your passion for this work, and it comes through in your questioning, and I share that. And again, we've done a lot of great work together and made this a top priority together. So I really appreciate your partnership and your friendship, Chair Valone. I remember a few years ago I told Fred Dixon this story. My husband and I were in Amsterdam, and we were thrilled to see advertisements for folks to come to New York City that were particular to Pride Month, and it made us very happy. I think I took a photo of it and texted it to Fred and said, thank you for this ad. We're here in Amsterdam, feeling very proud at the moment of our city and NYC Company. But it calls to mind what I assume is a plan and a ramp up of advertising overseas to remind folks that we're open and that Broadway is open, our major culturals are open, and of course our Queens and Brooklyn and neighborhood-based arts groups are open as well. But maybe NYC and Company could talk a little bit about that plan, that ramp up, that strategy to have those ads as we saw them, I think, outside of the Van Gogh Museum that day several years ago in Amsterdam.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. We have basically two phases to our out-of-home media. So previously, prior to the grant that we received, we were very forward with the out-of-home media. That drove our international partnerships. This year, because of the additional funding, that's been a great sort of awareness building overlay to the media that we can now offer those partners. So we do expect to have a lot more ROI to the campaigns, which is great. But we do have some creative up live. If you saw the NYC Misses You creative internationally, we had quite a bit of that running just while we were sort of, again, keeping the flame burning for our international visitors. We've replaced that with New York City is ready to welcome you as we begin to develop these international partnerships that I mentioned. So the first one just went live last week with British Airways. So you'll see our signage all over London. We have quite a bit of inventory in London. Then we'll be closely followed by Canada, Mexico. We're in discussions with several other partners in Germany, Korea, and so on. So we will have 10 partnerships in 10 international countries through to the end of the year launching, and it will continue into Q1 with some markets that we're obviously watching, but they're not ready to execute, like Australia and China. We are reserving and just trying to keep the button ready to push when those markets are ready. But we've got at least 10 going live. So we've been in conversations with our international partners for some time as we sort of were hurry up and waiting for this day. And then once November 8th was announced, we went fairly full force. So you will see our signage everywhere once again. Within the next month to 2 months, we will be live in 10 markets. But right now, that signage is up in London, and then it will stagger as these partnerships are completed.
That's great, thank you. And is that a direct spend, or is that, as you mentioned, through partnerships? Because this gets to your budget, right? So how much of that is direct spend that's tied to your budget, and how much of that is agreements, partnerships? You're working with other folks and getting that space, but it's not necessarily a real heavy lift on the budgetary side.
The out-of-home in particular is within our existing JC2Co inventory, so that is not an incremental spend, but we are layering on the value to give over to the partner. We are then making a direct spend out of the stimulus funds to the partner, as well as in media that will drive attention to that partnership. So it's just allowing it to be a lot more robust. The more we can promote to the airline or tour operators following. So being able to come to the table with a digital buy with that partner, it absolutely allows us to generate a lot more awareness where normally it would be a very small investment plus the out of home. So we are deploying a significant amount of the funding that we received as working dollars in media, direct with the partner in many cases, and also in third-party media in the market to drive awareness around the combined efforts. So we try to create a very integrated ecosystem with the partner. So we will advertise in the region, serve up what we call a warm lead, someone whose activity we're kind of tracking online. If we think they're expressing an interest in travel, we'll send that lead over to the partner website. So for example, British Airways site, for them to book their trip to New York, and then they'll send that person back to us for planning purposes on things to do and tickets to buy, et cetera, et cetera. So the money has been being directed to those sorts of efforts. So either on the partners channels as well as on third-party channels to generate the broader reach.
I find this work fascinating. I really do. I think it's really important, and not enough people follow it in New York City, because it's how we support our city and the sectors that are dependent on tourism, and it involves a lot of strategy, and it involves a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that folks overseas want to keep coming here. Obviously, people will always want to come to New York City because it's so great, but it doesn't hurt to remind them how wonderful we are. And obviously, your budget, is one that we've always wanted to be more robust, and obviously this will be a question for another administration and another city council, but I hope that you all are going to get the resources that you need to continue the work post stimulus. Chair Vallone mentioned this a little bit, but I'm fascinated by the ramp up in our tourism numbers, right? And I think Donna talked a little bit about this, but at our peak, we were in the 65 million range, right, of tourists coming to this city after that 10-year incremental and sometimes not so incremental increase in visitorship. And of course, it fell dramatically. Do you have a 5-year, 10-year goal, right? Is there, are we charting it? I know that's almost impossible because there are so many variables here, including variance, but do we have like KPIs that we're looking at that will give us some sense of where we're going and what our targets are? Does that make sense?
Thank you for the question. We work very closely with one of the leading economics firms in the industry, Tourism Economics. It is an Oxford economics company, and they work with us to understand the economic forces, the access to New York, and New York City's own assets, what we have to offer to these global markets, whether it's the California vacationer or the school break person from South America or Europe or Asia. And so when we look at where we are right now, what our pace of recovery has been to date, what the concerns are of the travelers, because we're also constantly taking the pulse of our potential travel market. What are their concerns? What are their financial aspects? We're in an interesting position in terms of, for many people with the capability to do long haul travel, international or transcontinental, their jobs have not been affected. There is a lot of pent up demand. There is a lot of additional savings. There is a lot of room on people's credit cards to run up some bills again because they paid down those credit cards during the pandemic when there was nothing else to do. So from an economic perspective, our potential markets are economically able to travel. They're waiting for their visas or their permits or their comfort levels to pick up. The American travel market, we will be watching very closely coming into the holidays, but it does look as if our hotels are beginning to see very short window booking. People are not sure they want to plan a very far way out from a trip, but our weekend performance in an increasing number of hotel rooms every week as more properties have opened and new properties have come online is in some weekends running at nearly 85%. Though what's weakening the hotel performance is that midweek number, which is still dependent on business travel, which is still soft, although getting better, and the international visitor who comes and stays a week and is here on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday because they're on vacation. The domestic travel, we're always been a weekend getaway. New York is wonderful on the weekends. So the resiliency of this city as a city and our industry in it is something we should never take for granted. It takes work. It takes partnership and cooperation and good support. But people who know me know I've been in this job since the post 9/11 period. And I've watched us suffer and come back from 9/11, from recessions, and now from this global change. I'm a New Yorker. We will come back, and probably faster than my forecast, but please don't hold me to that.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate your defiant love of New York, and I too have been blessed to only be a New Yorker for my entire life. But I would go even a step further, along with Chair Vallone, and say that I've been a Queens resident for all 52 years of my life, and very proud of that. So speaking of Queens, I know we've touched on it, but talk a little bit about your support and the resources you direct to reminding folks that while we acknowledge how important Manhattan is and the big commercial and central cultural hubs that we have there, and they are incredibly valuable. There is nothing like the Met or the Museum of Natural History and all of those great institutions that I love. But we also know that there is a great big borough of Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx and Staten Island with lots to offer too. And how do we always remind folks, like when the US Open is happening, that when we see all of those well-dressed folks on the 7 train, which we sometimes like, we want to make sure that they get off at Sunnyside and Woodside and Jackson Heights and Corona and Flushing and spend some of that Midwestern dollars here in our beloved Queens.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. We have a 5-borough strategy. It's core to our mission. And quite frankly, it's the only way that we can promote an authentic experience in New York City for travelers who more and more every year are looking for more of an authentic experience. We certainly promote the iconic attractions that are particularly relevant for a first-time visitor. But those visitors that continue to come back multiple times, the UK visitor is a great example. In particular, we have to ensure that we are promoting our local attractions and our businesses in order to ensure that we are properly promoting New York City. It takes a few different forms. So I would say there's an always-on approach in our content and our press efforts. So you will see in our channels daily, whether it's our website or our social channels or in our press channels, every business that we can possibly promote within the boroughs, the restaurants, the culturals. That's an endemic part of our coverage. We've also recently launched several content packages that are evergreen, the Black experience in NYC, the Latino experience in NYC, and then we will be launching the Asian experience in NYC, which are evergreen hubs that we will use to showcase the businesses and the business owners throughout the boroughs, again, that make for a very culturally diverse experience that our locals are looking for and our travelers are looking for. So that is something that is, again, always on. And then within our initiatives, we do take special care within our membership team and our community affairs team under Shadon Smith and Siobhan Simpson to physically go out to as many businesses throughout the boroughs to ensure that if they have a desire to participate in our programs and hopefully reach the economic benefit of those programs, that they can do so. So that can range from things like neighborhood getaways, which is, again, an always-on offers platform to showcase local businesses that exist today and we've had since last summer. And then our vibrancy campaign. So for example, our restaurant week, must-see week for the culturals, and then we've created new programs such as It's Time for Culture that is only for that sector, which ran for the month of October. So we're always looking for opportunities to highlight them with offers that are perhaps more transactional, directing to what is open right now, and then the content experiences. And also from a B2B perspective, we have campaigns like Tourism Ready, which helps local businesses who are interested in selling to the travel trade. It is a very strange world, and you do have to have a particular way of packaging your offering to sell the travel trade. So that is a free program that we are now in our 6th year of offering, where we will, and as a former member of NYC and Company, I actually took this course before coming to work here, and it was a game changer for our organization. So that really helps shepherd small businesses through the system to help them package up their offering, and then we take them from there and help integrate them into some of the international sales missions. There are a lot of virtual opportunities still available where we can get them in front of the travel trade and meeting planners all around the world. So we kind of take them through our path once they're ready to do so. So we want to make sure that whoever is able to take advantage of the economic benefit and awareness of what we do can do that. So again, on the front end through our programs and content, on the back end through programs like Tourism Ready and our various member events and networking opportunities where we can help them partner with other organizations in their area.
Thank you for that. Oops, sorry about that.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add from the research perspective, 2 things. One, a lot of the effort that Nancy and her team and our sales and development team work with is based on tracking research that we've been doing here at NYC and Company, where we know that visitors from out of the city, out of state, and out of the country are traveling and spending money in all of the neighborhoods and the boroughs of New York. And we are working on some very exciting big data opportunities that are moving more slowly than as a researcher I would have liked. But this is something that we are able to actually show. We've been doing it for years. Started with a report that we worked on with the Visa credit card company. And it's confidential, it's not identified, but we can see a steady increase in particularly international travel into neighborhoods beyond the central business district of Manhattan and across the boroughs. And I challenge any of you to play a game I play with my colleagues, which is take a picture on the subway and ask someone, tourist or local. And if they can't hear them speak, my guess is they will get it wrong more often than they'll get it right, because our visitors no longer stand out and look different. They look and sound a lot like our marvelously diverse city. And we are sometimes not aware that that family walking down the street in front of us. And I just have to add, I'm a Bronx girl, sorry. Not sorry I'm a Bronx girl, but for the Queens members of the committee. In the Bronx, there's a very large international travel component that is, some of it is friends and family, some of it is driven by the attractions in the borough, some of it is simply visitors who come to explore, from the Botanic Garden to baseball to the food and culture, from the South Bronx to the North Bronx. So it's there and we are tracking it.
Well, while I appreciate folks who spend money going to Yankee Stadium, I have to say you lost me there as a lifelong Met fan. But speaking of all the love for the boroughs, Majority Leader Cumbo from the great borough of Brooklyn is up next. I just have one last question before Majority Leader Cumbo addresses the panel, because you mentioned some various targeted efforts, and I sort of alluded to it with the Amsterdam ads that we saw a few years ago, my husband and I, but obviously the LGBTQ traveler, and while not all of us are able to travel, many folks are and enjoy that experience, and how are you working with and making sure we get the most visitorship from the LGBTQ community?
Yeah,
Nancy, can I just start with a bit of data again? That's what happens when you put the research head on the talk. New York City is the #1 destination in the US for the LGBT plus markets. We are continued to be that right up through the first quarter of 2020, as almost everyone who could travel sort of shifted to beach and mountain. The community went the same way, but recent surveys continued to put New York as a top of mind, highly desirable destination for the LGBT communities, and that is domestic as well as international. Certainly New York hosted World Pride in 2019 to extraordinary success, and we're riding into 2020 with a very positive image of the city. I am tracking attendance at the Stonewall Monument, which is a national monument, and people are coming into New York and visiting the Stonewall Monument, even in the pandemic. So I think that it is a small measure, but a continuing measure of the position that New York holds in the hearts and minds of our community. Sorry to cut you off, Nancy.
No, not at all. That's great. And I would just add that as part of the campaign, our media strategy was designed to target what we call, there are two segments, the travel dreamers and the travel ready. Again, we launched this in June, and we were really needing to be a lot more aggressive as people began to contemplate travel. So that's about 51 million people. And within that, we did notice early on that the LGBTQ segment was among the first to travel. So that's really something we're addressing in our audience targeting and the partnerships that we have upcoming from a branded content perspective with media partnerships in the LGBTQ space. So we're RFPing that now and developing that. It's a little bit more of a deeper content experience versus just an ad. So that should begin launching probably next month, December, into Q1, because we obviously recognize the value of that traveler and are working very in a concerted effort to make sure that we remain top of mind.
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. And again, I really find your work fascinating and deeply appreciate all that you all do behind the scenes to make all of this possible. I have more questions, but I know that Majority Leader Cumbo has her hand raised, and Brooklyn has not been heard from enough today, so I will invite Majority Leader Cumbo to join us.
Starting time.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm doing a lot of double duty today. My son is homesick, and so you hear the cartoons in the back, and trying to navigate a lot of things, but I'm so happy that this hearing is taking place. I wanted to ask a question in terms of federal funding. Many of our not-for-profit organizations, as well as organizations that are not-for-profit, but are cultural, huge tourism boosters for the city. My question is, do we know what percentage of our cultural institutions on the for-profit or not-for-profit side received federal subsidies or funding during the COVID pandemic? And I'm just saying, I'm prefacing that by also asking, my concern is a lot of the organizations have been propped up through additional funding, federal funding, even through the council, what we were able to allocate. But my concern will be, where will these organizations, both for-profit and not-for-profit, how will they fare when federal subsidy is not as robust as it is currently?
I don't think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I could take a stab at that, Majority Leader. So yes, you are correct. A lot of the cultural organizations received federal funding. I don't have the exact breakdown. I can tell you that we worked with our network to make sure people were aware of the opportunities to secure federal funding, whether it's Save Our Stages or the PPP program. We worked with them to ensure that they had competitive applications. I can look into the exact breakdown for you later, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
I think even if that type of documentation hasn't been done at this point, I think it would be very helpful to understand and learn how has federal funding impacted organizations? What's the percentage of them that received it, so that we know, or we have a better understanding of the landscape, so that while things are opening up and things aren't at full capacity, a lot of that was able to happen because of federal funding and that level of support. But once that level of federal support leaves and we still have certain mandates in place, I feel like that's where the rubber is going to meet the road in terms of where the challenges are going to really begin, because many organizations have been able to exist because of the fact that they had the federal subsidies.
Yeah, and I would also that's true. And I'd also echo that because of our partnership with the council, you all have been very generous as well in us being able to give out more money. I mean, last year we had a record budget of $230 million. So I know that that's not going to happen every year, but it was a good year in that regard to help a lot of our cultural organizations, and particularly the smaller based community organizations that actually were not able to access the PPP program as much as others were. So agreed concern, and we can certainly look into that and get back to you with the numbers.
My other question is more on the health side, and I apologize if this was touched upon. So I would imagine in all sectors, but I would just taking a stab in the dark on this, that in the cultural sector, the issues around immunization and getting the vaccine is going to be more robust and deeper in the cultural community than maybe perhaps other sectors. Have there been any discussions or understandings in terms of vaccination rates in the cultural community? And have there been, because we're experiencing this in the opening of the Bedford Union Armory in my district, that many of the not-for-profits are having lots of issues with doing after-school programs, their educational programs, bringing staff back to work who have now refused to get the vaccine. And some people actually have actual medical reasons as to why they can't get the vaccine. Has there been a thought in terms of, or any discussion around how we navigate within the cultural sector, individuals not getting the vaccine?
I think that's a topic that many cultural leaders have been looking at, in particular for their own staff. And I think early on, when the vaccine mandates were being discussed and then eventually implemented, we worked with the Department of Health to hold several briefings with the Culture at 3 group to get that information out there. I think we see this. Yes, it's happening in the cultural sector. I think it's happening everywhere. There's some people that just are not, for whatever reasons, are not comfortable getting the vaccine, whether it's a health reason or a religious reason. There are just some folks that are not interested in that and are not doing it. But we have been working with our cultural partners to ensure that they have the information that DOHMH provides, and the state and the city, state and the federal government have also provided to help ensure more confidence in the vaccines as they're doing their public education efforts as well.
Okay, I think in bringing the culture and economic committees together, I again think that those are really critical issues as far as what's going to happen when the federal funding is no longer at the level that it was, as well as once organizations have to begin to operate without that level of deep subsidy, and they're not able to attract the staff and the individuals and the teaching artists to run those programs, I'm concerned about that time frame, or what happens when those issues, I guess, collide or come together in some way. So it's just something to put out there in terms of getting the numbers of understanding how is the cultural community being impacted by the vaccines, and staff opting to take the vaccine or not opting to take the vaccine. Also, which organizations have qualified for the federal funding, and which ones have not or didn't know about it. So I'll end my questions there, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. We will now hear from Councilmember Cornegie, who has a question.
Good morning. I want to thank the chairs, both Vallone and Van Bramer, for hosting this hearing. I just think that the coordinated effort for true recovery and resiliency should include SBS, or and so the chair, Mark Jonah, and I have had conversations, as the former chair, have had conversations about this recovery and resiliency. And while in the past, it may have seemed that the three could operate in these silos, I'm glad that there's a coordinated effort, obviously, between cultural affairs and economic development. I would just love to loop in SBS, because as we try to build back for true recovery and resiliency without a coordinated effort between three, I think it's going to make it really difficult. We seem to be, if I'm out and about, whether it's in Nolita or Flatbush or the Upper West Side, people seem to be adapting to coming back, and the city seems to be on an upturn and an uptick, which leads me to believe that there's an opportunity for better coordination. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, the panelists, for example.
We have had regular interaction and dialogue with SBS throughout the last 18 months, and really made a concerted effort to share information, resources. We went to SBS when we were looking for agency partnerships to ensure that we were talking to the right small businesses right in our own community from a marketing standpoint. So we definitely agree and would look forward to more of that moving forward. But yes, we do value the partnership we have, and we have appreciated the dialogue we've had thus far. But yeah, we agree. We would look to continue that moving forward as well.
I want to thank the chairs for setting a precedent for coordination, and hopefully their successors and the successors of all the agencies will see the necessity for continued coordination, especially as we look for true recovery and resiliency. Again, thank you for the chairs for hosting this hearing, and thank you for the panelists for all the wealth of information that you've given today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cornegie. We'll now turn it back to Chair Vallone for some additional questions.
I know Chair Van Bramer has some questions. I just wanted to thank both our Majority Leader and Councilmember Cornegie. I think Jimmy and I have been screaming for interagency cooperation, has been my favorite term for about 8 years. And I think small business is critical to this component. So I thank him for those components. And I know Jimmy mentioned it, and I want to also, if you could express our gratitude to Fred Dixon for his leadership. And there's been a few bills and a few budgetary ideas that we've had extensive conversations on how to always bring the proper tools to New York and Company as a subsidiary of EDC, and to make sure that the realization of its importance is seen on a budgetary priority, on a legislative priority, with over the 50 council members working hand in hand, and especially with the amount of responsibilities that have been placed at your doorstep during pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and as we're coming out of the pandemic, which I think we all believe. My last question would be, is there any, guidelines or determining factors, maybe in some of our neighboring European countries, that have maybe opened the doors a little earlier than we have, to see how their international tourism programs are going as some type of, guideline or benchmark for New York and the United States? But for our focus here, have we seen any, how you mentioned some of the partnerships with British Airways in England and France. Can we guide some of the progress there in the EU or some of the other countries, since they opened a little earlier than we have, to maybe see the quarterly and annual progress there? Is there anything that we can use?
We have recently discussed re-engaging what we call our city-to-city partnerships that we've had for several years, where we really are swapping media assets, sharing key learnings and best practices, and which it may or may not be a surprise, but they are actually continuing to look to us for guidance.
No surprise there, none whatsoever.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the more we talk to our colleagues, as now we've been all kind of attending the global conferences again and been interacting over the last year and a half, we're all essentially following a similar playbook with the concentric circle approach. Everybody was sort of forced to talk to their locals and citizens, perhaps for the first time in some countries. At least we had some precedents for doing that with our vibrancy campaigns, which were largely locals at Tri-State anyway. But there were many areas of the world that had never spoken to a local. So they came to us very early on with, what are you doing and how do you do it? And how do you then expand that relevancy now that that's really, you're fishing where the fish are. So a lot of our comrades were not really used to doing that. So we've been in a sort of unofficial dialogue with them over the last year and a half, and now looking to start back up city to city partnerships, particularly with our European counterparts to start. But they've been asking us questions all along the way, and we've just been trying to share what it is we're doing. We've issued our roadmap, and we'll be following up with a sort of sequel to that later on this year with how we've sort of prepared again, how we fared against the roadmap, and going into some more detail on that. So we are happy to share that information with them. And again, I think in principle we've all been doing a lot of the same things to different effects, but
and I guess, Nancy, just following that but do we have any data from them on how their international tourism percentages have started to rise, I guess, in the last quarter? Because since they started a little earlier than we did.
Yeah.
Something to take a look at if we don't have today, but.
We don't have it. It is something we can look into.
And I guess I think just since we're all on that same page, I think my last, not so much question or maybe concern is, some of the vaccination guidelines are still, as we kind of feel our way through this, what we're accepting into New York City and maybe in Broadway is what we're understanding is a little bit different than what the restaurants are accepting. And there's some confusion and concern that if you go to see a show, but then the restaurant won't accept the same vaccination, I guess, protocols, I hate that word, that we're accepting in different areas. I think we have to coordinate whether we're just accepting the 3 vaccinations that we've accepted here in the United States and New York, or we're going to accept the global WHO vaccination guidelines, which are a little bit different because there is some difference in policies and guidelines on what you can use to get into a show versus what you can use and accept it at a restaurant. And that's hindering some of the flow, because that's what you want to do is a continuation of activities once you're into the boroughs of New York City. The last thing you want to do is be able to go see something but not be accepted someplace else. So I don't know if we're working toward coordinating and unifying that, but there is a difference out there.
Yeah, we're doing as much as we can to share the information as it becomes available, and it has been as it's been changing and evolving over time. So that information is top of mind for us because it's top of mind for travelers. We don't want people to be confused. In some cases they are, and particularly we work very closely with the Hospitality Alliance, and particularly, as you mentioned, in that sector, it's a concern on a few levels with compliance as well. So we're doing the best we can to make sure people know what those guidelines are before they arrive, and also when they get here. So to your point, consistency is key. But we work very hard to try to make sure we continue to share that in a very clear, concise way so people can a little bit more easily navigate it on our sites and our channels. And again, we want to do whatever possible with our counterparts to make it as seamless and clear as possible, because you're right, there is some amount of confusion. So we're helping to dispel that so people understand when they arrive what to expect. It's key to the visitor experience.
Well, I guess the sooner we can rectify that, the better. We don't want, especially with the holidays upon us, somebody being turned away one place where they're accepted another. So if we could maybe even temporarily try to suspend that or give it a universal where as long as you're vaccinated, it'll be approved, that'd be a huge help to the small businesses, restaurants, and hotels. And now I'd like to tear it over to my friend and co-chair, Jimmy Van Britt.
Thank you very much, Chair Vallone. And I just want to say, Deputy Commissioner Feinberg, thank you for mentioning that we received record funding at the Department of Cultural Affairs this past year. Obviously, something that I'm very proud of, and Majority Leader Cumbo and the entire council is proud of. And you mentioned that that you may not be able to expect that level of funding every year. I hope you're right, but I hope that it's more funding that you get in the coming years.
From your lips to God's ears, yes.
Yes. I'm sure. Obviously, I have great respect for Commissioner Casals, but whomever will be the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs next year, I'm sure would also appreciate an increase in funding for the agency. I just want to thank all of you. I know we have other folks, so I'm going to keep it brief this time and just say I appreciate Majority Leader Cumbo talking about our culturals and obviously the focus in particular on our smaller neighborhood and community-based culturals, and Councilmember Cornegie talking about small businesses. And of course, so many of our small culturals are in fact small businesses, which I know Majority Leader Cumbo and Councilmember Cornegie also have a great deal of respect and fondness for. So thank you very much for all the information, and again, appreciate Chair Vallone and I working together on this. It's always great fun.
Thank you, chairs. We will now turn to the public portion of this testimony, of this hearing rather. I'd like to remind everyone that unlike in our typical council hearings, we will be calling on individuals one by one to testify. Each public panelist will be given 5 minutes to speak. So please begin your testimony once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the Zoom raise hand function, and we will call on you in the order that you raised your hand. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and then the sergeant at arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. I would like to now call Thomas Ferrugia to testify. And after Mr. Ferrugia, we will hear from Sane Wright and then Sarah Cecilia Bukowski. Mr. Ferrugia, you may begin as soon as the sergeants announce the time.
Starting time. Good morning. I did submit a longer statement for the record, but I do have a shorter version to read to try to get in under 5 minutes. I think I should be able to do it. Good morning again. I'm Tom Ferrugia with the Broadway League. We thank Chairman Bramer and Vallone, as well as the members of the Committees on Cultural Affairs and Economic Development, for allowing us to participate in this hearing. I would also like to acknowledge Speaker Johnson and Councilmember Powers, who represents this district, for their unwavering support for the live entertainment industry. Prior to the pandemic, Broadway drove an average of 40,500 theatergoers to Midtown Manhattan each day. Based on our 2018 to 2019 theater season, which was our last complete season, Broadway grossed $1.829 billion on 14.8 million tickets, averaging $35 million per week on 284,000 admissions. In 2019, 46% of admissions were tourists living outside New York City and the surrounding suburbs, while 19% were visitors from abroad. Broadway drew this healthy foreign audience from all over the world, comprising the highest number of international visitors in all of Broadway's history. The average foreign-born tourist saw 2.3 shows and stayed in the city for 6.7 days. Broadway motivated foreign spending on ancillary activities, excluding the cost for their theater tickets, exceeded $2.9 billion. While we do anticipate losing a large portion of domestic tourists this coming year, our biggest fear is that foreign visitors still represent our most at-risk theatergoers. We would like to highlight several policies for encouraging visitors to return to Manhattan and helping sustain Broadway's economic growth. As Councilman Vallone has already mentioned, theater safety, we feel, is a significant factor. Area safety is a significant factor for returning visitors. And there has been a proliferation of aggressive vendors who often attempt to harass victims into paying for photographs in Times Square. We therefore thank the council for passing the aforementioned Intro 1811, which addresses many of these concerns. However, as always, as with everything, we believe that active police enforcement and oversight by this body is going to be critical to ensuring that this new law achieves its goals. We also believe access to Midtown remains vital, and the continual addition of sidewalks and bicycle lanes, clogging streets and making vehicular access to the theater district needlessly complicated seems like a short-sighted approach to addressing a larger problem. Visitors should be welcomed, regardless of their means of transport, not exacerbated by a lack of pickup and drop-off access. For example, in addition to the many changes that have already been made to accommodate bicyclists, the city recently installed another bike lane along the east side curb on 7th Avenue Midtown and relocated street parking into what was formerly a car lane, thus fully eliminating 2 vehicular lanes. When vehicles frequently double park, traffic is then forced into a single lane. This traffic then clogs up even further as these vehicles must eventually turn off 7th Avenue into the theater district. We do acknowledge the need for bicycles, but we recommend that local businesses are given an opportunity to meaningfully participate in the decisions that directly impact their customers. We are already experiencing near gridlock, nonstop horn honking, and inconvenience for the more than 15% of theater goers who come to Broadway every week by car. Finally, we asked the City Council to revisit Councilman Power's proposals to reform the commercial rent tax, which has been discussed by this council many times, a regressive assessment that creates a disincentive to operating businesses in Midtown. Intro 1371 would provide measured relief to taxpayers with incomes of less than 10 million or who pay less than $800,000 a year in rent. And Intro 1372 would end the tax on billboard advertisements in the theater district. As the economy struggles to recover and we work to rebuild our audiences, we feel that the city must focus on removing undue financial obstacles and supporting financial growth. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. As always, we look forward to continued collaboration with the council to ensure that New York City remains the cultural and financial capital of the world. And I do have some data, if anyone would interested in talking later, some numbers about how Broadway is doing and how things have been over the last couple of weeks compared to how our numbers have been historically. Thank you.
Tom, thank you for the testimony. We do have the written testimony, and please make sure you tell all of your partners, especially Charlotte, that we are so excited that Broadway's back, and we always look forward to working with you and her and the entire organization.
I will make one point. Last week we had our 1 millionth admission since we opened, since the Cove reopened, since September 2nd. So that was a big. We're very happy that numbers are moving in the right direction. So
Jimmy and I are responsible for a few of those numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know about a million, but we're getting there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrugia. Next, we will hear from Sane Wright, and then Sarah Cecilia Bukowski, followed by Lisa Alpert. Sane Wright, you may begin when the sergeant's call time.
Starting time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sana Wright, and I am the External Affairs Manager at the Times Square Alliance. Thank you, Chair Vallone, Chair Van Bramer, and members of the committees for their efforts to help New York City recover. We are very grateful for your continued work to support the tourism industry over the past several years. It is no secret that Times Square is the center of the city's tourism industry. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, Times Square was home to 16% of the city's total hotel rooms, driving $2.5 billion in annual revenue. Times Square's theater district, heavily patronized by visitors from across the globe, brought in $12.6 billion in total annual economic impact. Similarly, the district's 668 storefronts generated $168 million in annual sales tax revenue. Today, these numbers look different. Since the pandemic, there has been an 89% decline in hotel occupancy, totaling a loss of $417 million in occupancy tax revenue, as well as 89,000 jobs in the tourism sector. In Times Square alone, 70 storefronts have closed. At the height of the pandemic, pedestrian counts fell by 91% to 33,000. We have made strides towards recovery, but over 10 Broadway theaters remain closed, and pedestrian traffic, commercial leasing, and consumer spending all remain down by 32%, 40%, and 60% respectively. If we want over 60 million tourists to return to New York and Times Square annually, we must ensure that the city is at its most safe and welcoming. Since before the pandemic, our streets, sidewalks, and plazas have been inundated with people in need, including individuals engaging in open drug use, experiencing mental health crises, and sometimes engaging in criminal, violent, or otherwise disruptive behavior. The current policy of allowing antisocial and illegal activity to occur without intervention is failing. Instead, the city must commit to enforcing against illegal activity and sufficiently fund humane, effective policies to help troubled people find their way off the streets and into treatment and/or transitional housing. BIDS and other community-based organizations across the city have the potential to be some of the strongest partners in making our public spaces clean, vibrant, and welcoming to our visitors. Currently, the Alliance partners with the Center for Court Innovation, Breaking Ground, and Fountain House on Community First, a program that uses peer community navigators to provide consistent outreach to persons in need on our streets, building trust by offering essentials like food and blankets, and then connecting people to mental health care, transitional housing, benefits, and employment. After a 6-month pilot period, Community First received funding from the Department of Social Services to continue its work for the next year. Since mid-July, navigators have engaged with 120 individuals on the street. Through sustained interactions and trust building, 20 of them have accepted longer-term support, like housing and drug treatment. Programs like Community First require supportive housing and other social services to be readily available and well-functioning, but the city has yet to invest sufficiently in both. If we wish to fully recover, this must be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Next, we will hear from Sarah Cecilia Bukowski, followed by Lisa Alpert, and then Barbara Blair. Ms. Bukowski, you may begin when the sergeant's call time.
Starting time.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Cecilia Bukowski. I'm the Research and Advocacy Assistant at Dance NYC, for a service organization dedicated to the dance workforce here in New York City. I thank you for holding this joint hearing and for addressing some of the key concerns around the arts and cultural sector's role in the return of tourism to the city. And I'd like to take this opportunity to expand on some of the points that directly affect Dance NYC's constituency, which includes small budget organizations and focuses specifically on the needs of BIPOC, disabled, and immigrant arts workers. We know that the arts and culture sector is the #1 driver of tourism to the state. We generate $110 billion in economic activity, with the nonprofit dance sector contributing $300 million annually. The average cultural tourist spends approximately $31.47 beyond ticket costs on things like meals, retail, parking, lodging, local transportation, childcare, and souvenirs, to name a few. And these dollars provide vital income to local merchants in tourism-related industries. Non-local audience spending is nearly double local audience spending, so that's evidence of the measurable economic rewards in attracting cultural tourists. And as the foundation for the city's tourism industry, arts and culture can't operate sustainably without targeted recovery funding and dedicated ongoing support from the city. With gratitude, we believe that there are comprehensive improvements and investments to be made in order for arts and culture to continue as a primary engine for tourism. So first, we request to include arts and cultural businesses in recovery funding for the tourism industry, specifically to comply with public health mandates. Businesses are confronting increased expenses related to mandate compliance and an ongoing loss of revenue due to decreased attendance. And we ask that the city look to relief funds intended to support the recovery of the tourism industry to ensure that arts and cultural businesses can continue to provide programming in compliance with public health regulations. Secondly, we request to prioritize additional funding to organizations experiencing the highest levels of impact from the pandemic. So particularly the hardest hit small budget organizations, and acknowledging the disproportionate impact on BIPOC, immigrant, and disabled artist communities. Fewer and less representative arts workers and arts organizations in the city directly results in losses to cultural diversity, tourism opportunities, and revenue generation across sectors and locales. And third, we request to further expand city-funded media campaigns to support the nonprofit arts and culture sector, in addition to Broadway and for-profit entertainment. I've been seeing the multi-million-dollar Welcome Back to New York marketing campaign that puts Broadway front and center, but the city must also recognize that the vibrancy and value of the arts reaches far beyond Broadway. And expanding these media campaigns to include nonprofit arts and cultural organizations throughout the 5 boroughs would not only support their programming, but also bring much needed economic investment and tourist dollars to neighborhoods hardest hit by the pandemic. Taken together, we believe these measures could stand to support arts and culture as a key driver of the tourism economy in the city. We believe that an equitable, sustainable citywide recovery requires a citywide investment in the people, organizations, and industries that drive economic activity and make every neighborhood in this city unique and vibrant. Dance NYC thanks you for your consideration and commends your leadership and ongoing efforts to support the recovery of the arts and culture sector as tourists return to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bukowski. Next, we will hear from Lisa Alpert, followed by Barbara Blair. And as a reminder to anybody remaining on who has not submitted testimony or raised their hand to testify, please submit testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of the conclusion of the hearing. Ms. Alpert, you may begin when the sergeant's call time.
Starting time.
Hi, everyone. Chair Van Bramer, Chair Vallone, fellow Brooklynite, Majority Leader Cumbo, everyone else on the call, and everyone from NYC and company for this really great conversation. If anyone on the call is not familiar with Greenwood, you should come visit us. We are a very active cultural institution throughout the year, have about 250 public programs annually. So I'd just like to add to this dialogue in a really passionate and urgent way to make the case that it's especially important that this committee look at the unexpected and unconventional, yet no less popular cultural spaces in New York City, like, for example, Greenwood Cemetery, and support them and help them continue to accommodate and serve their audiences. Here's just what's going to really surprise you, I think. Greenwood sees a surprisingly high number of visitors annually. In 2019, Greenwood had about 300,000 visitors. In 2020, that number doubled. We saw 600,000 visitors to Greenwood in 2020. And with numbers like that, Greenwood became one of the most visited cultural spaces in all 5 boroughs. In 2021, it looks like we're going to retain about 100,000 of those guys. So we are going to close out the year at about 400,000 visitors to this National Historic Landmark here in Brooklyn. And in turn, our local businesses like Baked to Brooklyn, for example, also enjoy a substantial uptick in their receipts at the registers based on people coming to Greenwood and then being, really exhausted from climbing up and down the hills and pathways here and needing some carbohydrates and hot coffee. So currently, while we do receive some annual report from the annual support from the Department of Cultural Affairs, we have not yet enjoyed the warm embrace, or really any embrace, from the City Council. But we are huggers, and we would be most
Here comes your
grateful.
virtual hug, Lisa. It's coming. It's coming.
I'm so excited. Be grateful for a real hug or a financial hug that will help support our growing audiences for cultural programs, environmental programs, and our biggest program of all, so to speak, the visitor services and orientation that serve our 400,000 annual visitors. We love welcoming New Yorkers and tourists to Greenwood, and we hope we can partner with you to continue to support their visits, their adjacent economic activity, and the cultural adventure that our visitors have when they visit this National Historic Landmark. That's it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yep.
And thank you, Ms. Alpert. Finally, we will hear from Ms. Barbara Blair. Again, please submit testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov to all who have not yet done so. Ms. Blair, you may begin when the sergeant's call time.
Starting time.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Blair. I'm the president of the Garment District Alliance. Thank you, Chair Vallone and Chair Van Bremer, and members of the committees for your efforts to help New York City recover after 20 devastating months. The Garment District is situated on Manhattan's west side and links the 34th Street Penn Station area to Times Square. Because of this central business district location, we have some of the highest pedestrian counts in New York City, Additionally, the Garment District has over 50 hotels hosting 1.9 million visitors to the city a year, and is the site of Penn Station with 600 riders a day and Port Authority with an additional 300 riders a day pre-pandemic. Over the last 2 years, the district has been negatively impacted by crime. The west side of Manhattan has had some of the highest rates of assaults, robbery, and other violent crime in the city. This is largely a result of individuals in dire need of help, including individuals experiencing mental health challenges, being present in the district, and the unfortunate outcome of over 4,300 individuals in hotels in Manhattan's west side, thus clustering severely ill individuals. Drug dealing and use is in the open, including openly injecting, needles strewn about our streets, individuals passed out on our sidewalks and in our plazas, and the accompanying disorder. Ground floor retailers, including restaurants, are terrorized by violent behaviors. Tenants that have returned to our office buildings have rejected conditions and opted to continue to work from home indefinitely, and visitors in the hotels are appalled by what they are witnessing in our great city. For our part, the Garment District Alliance has had 16 assaults on staff members in the last year. If we want over 60 million visitors to return to New York, as the Times Square Alliance said, we must ensure that the city is safe. Since before the pandemic, our streets, sidewalks, and plazas have been inundated with people in need, including individuals engaged in open drug use, experiencing mental health crisis, and sometimes engaging in violent and otherwise disruptive behavior. The current condition of allowing antisocial and illegal activity to occur without intervention is failing. Instead, the city must commit to enforcing against illegal activity and sufficiently fund humane, effective policies to help troubled people find their way off the streets and into treatment. The Garment District, and indeed the entire west side of Manhattan, home to our cherished theater industry, the Empire State Building, the 34th Street Shopping Quarter, and Times Square are all under assault. We implore the committee to put the safety of our streets, public order, and the insurance that recidivists and repeat offenders will be removed from the public realm and placed in appropriate safe settings wherein the support that they need is available at the very top of your priorities. The Garment District urges you to put public safety at the top of the list of considerations and to include the NYPD in any participating agencies looking at the recovery in New York City.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. As you can see, we look at those testimonies, and I referred to the ones that I had in hand. And from what we heard today, the number one topic was quality of life and public safety affecting those neighboring businesses. So please continue to be part of these dialogues and committee hearings for the next council and mayoral administration to be aware of that and not just hope things are magically going to get better. It's a complete process to make sure that comfortability level is back where it was before the pandemic. So we thank you so much for the testimonies of each of you. And Lisa, you got your virtual hug, so we have to make sure that the council does include all the hard work that you're doing, because as Councilmember Van Bramer did with Cultural Affairs, I can't tell you the impact that he had with the budget increase with my public schools in my district. We still don't have 100% because I have so many schools, but prior to me stepping into office, we basically had 0. And now we almost have a dozen. So just one impact of working together as council members, as agencies, as those who, as Jimmy said, are passionate about this industry and what it has on families and children and international and local visitors. So I think, Alex, to our council, do we have any more panelists for today?
That is it for today, Chair.
So am I safe to saying that Chair Van Bramer and I can wrap up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
I think we basically just did on my point on thanking our panelists and thanking Fred's team and EDC and working with Jimmy and his team and my staff. If this is our last hearing, it has been truly an honor to be the council member for Northeast Queens and serve as chair of EDC and bring forth these amazing topics on the cooperation that's necessary and not just assume things happen on its own. It's not the case. And having this partnership with council members and delegations and city hall and city agencies and our advocates that come and testify is how this is the greatest city in the world. And I hopefully have set a precedent that I know Chair Van Bramer and I will look forward to, and if not, we'll be back to make sure that they follow up on the great work that we have done, because it has to continue. And we couldn't have been as great a council members if we didn't have the amazing staff that we did. And I honestly had almost 100% the same staff I had from day one. So I thank them from the bottom of my heart for being part of this team. And I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Jimmy Van Bramer, who's part of this amazing Queens delegation who has brought Queens onto the map with all the other boroughs. Thank you. Jimmy, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Vallone, and you know it's very genuine. I regard you as an ideal colleague, and it's always been a pleasure to work with you. Unfailingly generous and kind, and you've accomplished a great deal on behalf of your district, the city of New York, and of course your stewardship of this committee and all the work that you've done. So I say thank you on behalf of all of us, and it is indeed an incredible legacy that you leave behind for now, should you ever potentially choose to revisit this particular space. But I know that you have a lot more to give to Queens and to New York City, one way or the other. So thank you, Chair Vallone, and for the partnership. And thank you to the panelists. Thank you to our team members who are here. I know that I have one final committee meeting in December that we will talk about libraries, and I'll end that, Chair Vallone, sort of where I began with my love of libraries. So I won't go on too long, but it's an incredible pleasure to serve with you, and it's an awesome obligation, responsibility, and blessing to have been in this position for the last 12 years on behalf of culture, the arts, and libraries. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing all the work that we've done continue, and the folks that we've supported continue to be supported.
With that, bring an adjournment and a closing to today's hearing, as Jimmy brought me to tears. Thanks, Jim. Have a good day, everyone.